From the 30th floor of the Pierce Tower, the city looked like a constellation of amber stars scattered across black velvet. Julian Pierce stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, a tumbler of Macallan 25 warming in his palm, watching the December snow drift past the glass in lazy spirals. Below, families hurried along sidewalks strung with lights, their breath visible in the freezing air, arms laden with wrapped boughs and the promise of Christmas morning. Up here, the Pennant house was silent except for the hum of climate control and the distant sound of his children sleeping behind closed doors. The clock on the wall read 9:47 p.m. Christmas Eve. Sarah had loved Christmas Eve, had filled this space with cinnamon and pine and laughter that echoed off the marble floors. Now the 12-foot tree stood in the corner with its lights programmed to blink on a timer. No ornaments except the ones the kids had insisted on hanging themselves, crooked and clustered at their eye level. No presents underneath. He'd meant to shop, had added reminders to his phone that he'd swiped away during board meetings and conference calls, telling himself he'd get to it. There was still time, always more time until suddenly there wasn't. His phone buzzed against the granite countertop. Victoria Chen, the text preview said, followed by 3 words that made his jaw tighten. We need to talk. The merger with Kellerman Industries was supposed to close after the holidays, a $200 million acquisition that would expand Pierce Holdings into the Midwest markets. But Kellerman's CFO had gotten cold feet yesterday, started asking questions about Julian's stability, whether a man with 5 8-year-olds and no spouse could really dedicate the focus such a partnership required. Victoria, ever pragmatic, had smoothed things over with assurances and spreadsheets, but Julian knew what the subtext meant. Get your house in order. Stop being a liability. He drained the whiskey and set the glass down harder than he meant to. The sound cracked through the quiet, sharp enough that he glanced toward the hallway, half expecting one of the kids to appear, rumpled and concerned. But the doors stayed closed. Asher, Emma, Noah, Lucas, Sophie, quintuplets, a statistical anomaly. Sarah's miracle. She'd carried them to 34 weeks, had emerged from the delivery exhausted and radiant, telling him they'd just expanded their family in one impossible stroke. 8 years later, she was gone, and Julian was failing at the one job that mattered more than any acquisition or quarterly report. The 8th nanny had quit yesterday, simply didn't show up for her shift, sent a terse email citing incompatibility with the family dynamic, which was a polite way of saying his kids had broken her. They broke all of them, not through cruelty, but through sheer, unrelenting need. 5 children grieving in 5 different ways, testing every boundary, searching for proof that this new adult would stay, or more likely, confirming their belief that no one ever did. Julian couldn't blame the nannies. He could barely keep up himself, and he'd helped create these small, fierce people. He walked to the kids' wing, stood in the doorway of the room the boys shared. Asher slept on his back, arms flung wide the way Sarah used to sleep. Noah was curled into a tight ball, face pressed to the pillow. Lucas had kicked his blankets into a nest at the foot of the bed, one leg dangling off the edge. In the girls' room across the hall, Emma sprawled diagonal across her mattress, a stuffed elephant clutched under one arm, while Sophie slept so still these might have been carved from stone. They deserved better than this. Better than takeout dinners eaten in front of screens because he didn't know how to cook anything beyond scrambled eggs. Better than a father who checked his email during their stories about school, who promised to make it to soccer games and recitals, and then sent his assistant with apologies and expensive gifts that couldn't substitute for presents. Sarah would have known what to do. She always had. The thought tasted bitter. 2 years since the cancer had hollowed her out, since he'd watched her fade in increments. First her energy, then her appetite, then the light in her eyes that used to find him across a room and make everything else irrelevant. She tried to prepare him. Near the end, her voice a rasp as she gripped his hand with what little strength remained. Find someone, she'd said, not to replace me, but someone who'll love them, someone who'll stay. He hadn't looked, hadn't wanted to. The idea of another woman in this space touching Sarah's things, sleeping in their bed, felt like a betrayal he couldn't stomach. So he'd buried himself in work, hired a rotation of help that never lasted, and pretended he was managing when really he was just treading water, waiting for the moment his head would slip under. Tonight, looking at his sleeping children on Christmas Eve with no gifts and no plan, Julian made a decision that bypassed logic entirely. He grabbed his coat and keys, walked back to the kids' rooms, and turned on the lights. 5 groans of protest. Asher sat up first, squinting. "Dad, what's wrong?" Nothing was wrong. Everything was wrong. Julian kept his voice steady. "Get dressed. We're going out." Emma pulled the elephant over her face. "It's nighttime." "I know. We're going to buy presents for Christmas." That got their attention. Noah rolled over, suddenly alert. Lucas scrambled upright, nearly falling off the bed in his excitement. Sophie blinked at him, uncertain, but Asher's face had shifted into something harder, more cautious. "The stores are closed," Asher said. "We'll find one that isn't. 5 minutes. Meet me in the foyer." He didn't wait for more objections, just turned and walked out, pulling on his coat as he went. Behind him, he heard the rustle of movement, whispered arguments, the thud of small feet hitting hardwood. By the time he reached the elevator, all 5 were stumbling out in mismatched clothes. Lucas in pajama pants and a winter coat, Sophie in her school uniform with snow boots, Emma still clutching the elephant. They piled into his Range Rover, a tangle of limbs and sleepy complaints, and Julian pulled out of the underground garage into the December night. The streets were mostly empty, holiday traffic reduced to the occasional taxi or delivery truck. Snow fell steadily now, fat flakes that clung to the windshield before the wipers swept them away. In the rearview mirror, he could see Noah pressed against the window, watching the city slide past, while Emma had already dozed off against Lucas's shoulder. "Where are we going?" Asher asked from the passenger seat, his tone still skeptical. "Toy store downtown. Should still be open." "It's 10:30, Dad." Julian glanced at his son, serious, responsible Asher, who'd taken on the role of deputy parent without anyone asking, who watched his siblings with a vigilance that belonged to someone much older. "Then we'll try somewhere else. We're not going home empty-handed." They drove through the business district, past Pierce Tower with its name etched in steel above the entrance, past the windows of closed boutiques and dark restaurants. The toy store was locked, a handwritten sign taped to the door. "Closed Christmas Eve at 6 p.m. Merry Christmas." Julian stared at it for a moment, feeling the absurdity of this entire expedition settle over him like the snow dusting his shoulders. "Dad," Sophie said softly from the back seat, "can we just go home?" He should. He should turn around, drive back to the penthouse, tuck them into bed and promise to make it up to them tomorrow. Order something extravagant online with overnight shipping. But the defeat in Sophie's voice, resignation, not surprise, made something crack in his chest. "No," he said, "not yet." He got back in the car, pulled onto the main avenue, heading east without a clear destination. Just moving, because stopping felt like giving up. They passed through neighborhoods he rarely visited, places where the Christmas lights were strung across porches instead of professionally installed by decorator teams, where the houses were narrow and close together, where people lived lives that didn't require personal assistance or board meetings. Lucas spoke up, his voice clearer now, less sleepy. "Dad, look." Julian followed his son's pointing finger. They were stopped at a red light near Pittsburgh General Hospital, the emergency entrance blazing with fluorescent urgency. And there, on a stone bench just outside the automatic doors, sat a woman. She was hunched forward, arms wrapped around herself, no coat despite the temperature that had to be in the teens. Her hair, blonde, long, damp with snow, fell forward, obscuring her face. The scrubs she wore were surgical green, the kind nurses changed into after their shifts, and beside her sat a single rolling suitcase, small enough to fit in an overhead compartment. Everything about her posture screamed cold, exhaustion, and something deeper. Defeat. "She's freezing," Lucas said, pressing closer to the window. Julian's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The light turned green. He could drive through, pretend he hadn't seen, get his kids home and deal with his own problems without adding someone else's to the pile. That would be the smart thing. The sensible thing. Emma stirred awake. "Who's that?" "No one," Julian started to say, but Asher cut him off. Mom wouldn't drive past her. The words landed like a physical blow. Julian sat there, engine idling, snow accumulating on the hood, while his children watched him with varying degrees of expectation and challenge. Asher was right. Sarah wouldn't have hesitated. She would have already been out of the offering her own coat, asking what was wrong and how she could help. He pulled the Range Rover to the curb 20 feet past the bench and put it in park. "Stay here, lock the doors." The cold hit him the moment he stepped out, sharp enough to steal his breath. He approached slowly, hands visible, making noise so he wouldn't startle her. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd thought, maybe late 20s, with a face that might have been pretty if it wasn't so pale and drawn. Her lips had a bluish tint. She was shivering so hard her teeth chattered. "Miss," he said, stopping a few feet away. "Are you all right?" She jerked upright, eyes wide with instant fear. For a moment, Julian thought she might bolt, but she just pressed herself against the bench, making herself smaller. Her gaze darted past him to the Range Rover, to the faces of his children watching through the windows, then back to him. "I'm fine." Her voice shook as badly as her body. "You're not fine. It's 15 degrees. When did you last eat?" She didn't answer. Her hands were clenched in her lap, and that's when Julian saw them clearly. The bruises circling both wrists, yellow-green fading into purple, the unmistakable shape of fingers pressed too hard. Old injuries, maybe a week or two past, but still visible. Still telling a story he recognized from charity galas and awareness campaigns. From statistics Victoria had cited when arguing for Pierce Holdings to sponsor a women's shelter. Something in his chest tightened. He pulled off his coat without thinking, held it out. She flinched. "I'm not going to hurt you," Julian said quietly. "I have 5 kids in that car. I'm just trying to help." "Why?" The question came out sharp, defensive. "Nobody helps for free." "Fair point. My wife used to be a nurse. If she were here, she'd already have you in the car with the heat on. I'm trying to do what she would have done." That seemed to crack something in the woman's armor. Her eyes, hazel and exhausted, filled with tears, she blinked away fast. "Your wife has good instincts." "Had. She died 2 years ago." The woman looked at him properly then, really looked, and whatever she saw made her shoulders drop slightly. She took the coat, pulled it around herself. It swallowed her, the sleeves hanging past her hands, and she buried her face in the collar for a moment, breathing in the warmth. "There's a diner 2 blocks from here," Julian said. "It's open all night. Let me buy you dinner. Then, if you want, I'll drive you wherever you need to go." "I don't have anywhere." The admission came out so quietly he almost missed it. Julian waited, let the silence stretch, giving her space to say more or nothing at all. Finally, she looked up at him again. "I just got here this afternoon. My bag was stolen an hour after I got off the bus. Everything I had was in it." She laughed, a brittle sound. "Well, almost everything." She touched her throat, and Julian noticed the thin gold chain there, a locket resting just below her collarbone. The only thing she'd kept close enough to save. "What's your name?" She hesitated, and he watched the calculation happen behind her eyes. Trust or don't trust. Truth or lie. "Claire. Claire Morgan." Julian extended his hand, then thought better of it when she tensed. He let it drop. "Julian Pierce, come on, let's get you warm." She stood slowly, stiff from sitting too long in the cold, and grabbed the handle of her suitcase. Julian gestured to the car, and she followed, each step careful, like she was expecting the ground to drop out from under her. He opened the rear door, and 5 faces stared out at Claire with open curiosity. "Everyone, this is Claire. Claire, this is Asher, Emma, Noah, Lucas, and Sophie." "Hi," Lucas said immediately, scooting over to make room. "You looked really cold." Claire managed a small smile as she climbed in. "I was. Thank you for noticing." Julian shut the door and walked around to the driver's side, his mind already racing ahead to logistics. Where to take her, what to say, how much to offer without making her feel like charity. But when he glanced in the rearview mirror, he saw Lucas had already given Claire the blanket from the emergency kit, and she'd wrapped it over Julian's coat, huddled under both layers while Emma watched her with solemn eyes. The diner was a 24-hour place called Rosie's, all chrome and cracked vinyl booths, the kind of establishment that had been serving truckers and night shift workers since before Julian was born. The waitress barely looked up when they walked in, just waved them toward a corner booth and promised menus in a minute. The kids piled into one side, Claire slid into the other, and Julian took the seat across from her, studying her now that they were in decent light. She looked worse than he'd thought. Bruises weren't just on her wrists. There was a faint yellow shadow along her jaw, almost hidden by her hair, and the way she held herself, slightly hunched, suggested ribs that had been hurt and hadn't fully healed. She caught him looking and pulled Julian's coat tighter, defensive. The waitress returned with a pot of coffee and a tired smile. Julian ordered enough food for everyone. Pancakes, eggs, bacon, toast, hot chocolate for the kids. And when she turned to Claire, the woman hesitated. Just soup and bread. Get whatever you want, Julian said. Soup is fine. The waitress left. Across the table, Asher was watching Claire with that assessing look he'd perfected, the one that meant he was cataloging details and drawing conclusions. Emma had abandoned her elephant in the car, but her hand kept drifting to her pocket, as if checking for its phantom presence. Sophie stared openly, while Noah and Lucas whispered to each other, shooting glances at the strange woman their father had picked up off the street. So, Julian said, wrapping his hands around the coffee mug the waitress had left. You're new to Pittsburgh. Yes. From where? Claire's jaw tightened. Does it matter? No, just making conversation. She relaxed slightly, took a sip of the water in front of her. Maryland, small town. You wouldn't know it. And you came here because it's not there. Fair enough. Julian didn't push. The food arrived in a chaos of plates and steam, and the kids dug in with the enthusiasm of children who'd been dragged out of bed in the middle of the night for an adventure. Claire ate her soup slowly, methodically, each spoonful deliberate, and Julian realized she was trying not to eat too fast, not to draw attention to how hungry she actually was. Miss Claire, Lucas said through a mouthful of pancakes, are you a nurse? She glanced down at her scrubs. I am. It's complicated. Our mom was a nurse, Sophie offered quietly. Claire's eyes shifted to Julian, a question there. He nodded. Sarah worked at Presbyterian, pediatric oncology. She loved it. That's a hard floor, Claire said, and something in her voice suggested she understood exactly how hard. Your mom must have been strong. She was sick, Emma said bluntly. Cancer. She died when we were 6. The table went quiet. Julian watched his kids process this. The casual way Emma had said it, no emotion, just fact. They'd learned to armor themselves, to present their mother's death as something that had happened rather than something that still happened every day in the space where she used to be. Claire set down her spoon, her expression soft. I'm sorry, that must have been really hard. It was, Lucas said. Is. Dad doesn't talk about it. Julian felt 5 pairs of eyes turned to him, accusatory in their uniformity. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that talking about Sarah meant feeling everything he'd been holding back for 2 years. That if he started, he might not stop, might just shatter right there in front of his kids, and then what good would he be to anyone? Instead, he deflected. Claire, do you have a place to stay tonight? She shook her head. I was going to figure something out in the morning. There's a women's shelter on 5th. No. The word came out harder than he meant it to. Everyone at the table stared. Julian forced his voice to even out. I mean, you shouldn't have to go to a shelter. Not on Christmas Eve. Asher's eyebrows rose. Emma leaned forward, suddenly interested. Claire just looked confused. I don't understand. Julian didn't either, not really, but the words came anyway, bypassing every logical filter. I need help with them. He gestured to the kids. Nannies don't last. I've been through 8 in 2 years. They say the kids are too difficult, too much to handle. And they're right. My kids are grieving and acting out, and I don't know how to help them anymore. Dad, Asher said, low and warning. Julian ignored him. You're a nurse. You know how to take care of people. I have a guest room, 3, actually. In exchange for a place to stay, you'd help with the kids. Make sure they eat, get to school, don't kill each other. No pressure. If you want to leave after a few days, that's fine. But at least tonight, you'd be somewhere warm and safe. Claire stared at him like he'd suggested something obscene. You don't know anything about me. I know you're running from someone. I know you're a nurse, which means you're trained and background checked. I know you're sitting here on Christmas Eve with nothing and nowhere to go. And I know I'm desperate enough to make this offer to a stranger because I'm out of options. That's not a good reason to invite someone into your home, especially not with children. No, Julian agreed, it's not, but I'm doing it anyway. The kids had gone silent, watching this exchange like a tennis match. Finally, Noah spoke up. We promise we're not that bad. Asher's bossy and Emma's mean sometimes, but mostly we're okay. I'm not mean, Emma protested. You told the last nanny her face looked like a foot. It did. Claire's lips twitched, almost a smile. She looked at Julian for a long moment, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. Desperation versus self-preservation. Need versus pride. Just temporarily, she said finally, until I can find it by and a place of my own. Agreed. And I pay rent once I'm working, if you insist. I do. Julian extended his hand across the table. This time, Claire took it. Her palm was cold, her grip tentative, but she shook once, firm enough to seal whatever strange agreement they just made. They finished eating in a strange new silence, the kids sneaking glances at Claire, who kept her eyes on her bowl. When the check came, Julian paid and herded everyone back to the car. The drive to Pierce Tower took 15 minutes, long enough for Emma and Sophie to fall back asleep, for Lucas to pepper Claire with questions about nursing that she answered in soft, patient tones, for Asher to retreat into sullen quiet that meant he was thinking too hard. The parking garage was empty except for Julian's designated spots. He pulled into one, killed the engine, and turned to look at his passengers. Claire was staring up through the windshield at the building rising above them, her expression unreadable. This is where you live? Top floor, private elevator. She didn't say anything else, just grabbed her suitcase and followed him to the elevator bank. The kids shuffled in, drowsy and complaining, and Julian used his key card to access the penthouse level. The ride up was silent except for the mechanical hum and Sophie's quiet snoring against Noah's shoulder. The doors opened directly into his foyer, marble floors, a chandelier that cost more than most people's cars, abstract art on the walls that Sarah had chosen, and he'd never bothered to change. Claire stepped out slowly, taking it all in with eyes that had gone carefully blank. This isn't a home, she said softly. This is a hotel. Julian winced. She wasn't wrong. The penthouse had 5,000 square feet of space that felt empty despite being full of furniture, rooms they never used. A kitchen he'd never learned to navigate. He ushered the kids toward their bedrooms, protests about wanting to stay up, promises that yes, they could open presents in the morning, even though he still had no presents to give them. And then returned to find Claire standing exactly where he'd left her, suitcase at her feet. Your room is this way. He led her down the west hallway, past his office and the formal dining room they'd used exactly once in 2 years, to the guest suite at the end. The door opened onto a space that was probably larger than the apartment she'd left behind. King bed, walk-in closet, bathroom with a soaking tub and rainfall shower. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, snow still falling past the glass. Claire walked in slowly, trailing her fingers along the doorframe. She set her suitcase on the bench at the foot of the bed and then just stood there, staring out at the view. Thank you, she said without turning around. You have no idea what this means. Julian did, actually. He'd seen it in her face at the diner, in the way she'd eaten that soup like it was the first food she'd had in days, but he just nodded. Bathroom's through there. Towels in the closet. Help yourself to whatever you need. The kids usually wake up around 6. They'll be loud. I'm used to loud. He turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. Claire, the bruises, you're safe here. I need you to know that. Her shoulders tensed, but she didn't turn around. I know. Julian closed the door quietly and walked back to his own room, suddenly exhausted in a way that went beyond the late hour. He shed his suit. When had he even put on a suit today? It felt like a year ago and collapsed onto the bed, still half-dressed. Sleep should have come easily, but instead, he lay there staring at the ceiling, thinking about the woman down the hall, about the deal he'd just made, about how Sarah would have reacted to him bringing home a stranger on Christmas Eve. She would have approved, he thought, or at least understood. Sarah had never been able to pass someone in need without stopping, without offering help in whatever form made sense. It had been one of the things he'd loved about her, the way her compassion was reflexive rather than calculated. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. Victoria again. Call me when you can. The Kellerman situation. Julian silenced it and rolled over. The Kellerman situation could wait. For the first time in months, he'd made a decision that had nothing to do with the company or the board or his reputation. He'd stopped for a stranger in the cold because 5 kids had reminded him of who he used to be, who Sarah had helped him become. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was a start. Down the hall in the guest room with its city view and unfamiliar luxury, Claire Morgan stood at the window watching snow fall on Pittsburgh. Her reflection stared back from the glass. Blonde hair tangled and damp, scrubs wrinkled, Julian Pierce's expensive coat still wrapped around her shoulders because she couldn't bear to take it off, not yet. She touched the locket at her throat, the one thing Derek hadn't destroyed, the one piece of her mother she'd managed to keep through everything. For 10 years, she'd lived in a house that was really a prison. For 10 years, she'd believed Derek when he said she was worthless, broken, that no one else would ever want someone who couldn't even manage the one thing wives were supposed to do. The baby had been her last chance, her secret hope, the proof that maybe she wasn't as defective as he'd spent a decade convincing her she was. And then she'd told him about it, thinking it would make him stop hitting her, and instead he'd called her a liar and kicked her hard enough to make sure there'd be no baby at all. Dr. Grace had helped her disappear, had given her money and a new name, well, an old name, her mother's maiden name, the one from before her father had decided marrying her off to Derek Winters was a sound financial decision. Claire Morgan instead of Vanessa Winters. A fresh start, a chance to become someone who wasn't defined by bruises and fear. The money had lasted exactly 6 hours in Pittsburgh before some kid on a bike had grabbed her purse and disappeared into an alley. Everything, cash ID, the prepaid phone Dr. Grace had given her, gone. She'd been sitting on that bench trying to figure out what to do next when Julian Pierce and his 5 children had materialized like something out of a dream she'd stopped letting herself have. She should be suspicious. Should be waiting for the catch, the moment when the kindness revealed itself as something else. But Julian had looked at her the way doctors looked at patients in triage, assessing, categorizing, deciding on treatment. And when he'd seen the bruises, his face had done something complicated. Not pity, not disgust, just a kind of quiet fury that wasn't directed at her. Claire pressed her palm against the cold window. Down below, the city glittered, oblivious to the small dramas playing out in its towers and alleys. Somewhere out there, Derek was probably still looking for her, still convinced she was his property to retrieve. Dr. Grace had promised the paperwork was solid, that Vanessa Winters was as good as dead, but paperwork was just paper. If Derek wanted to find her badly enough, he would, but not tonight. Tonight, she was 30 stories above the street, in a room that cost more per month than she used to make at 6, with a door that locked from the inside and a man who'd promised she was safe. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him so badly it hurt. She finally took off the coat, hung it carefully in the closet, and went into the bathroom. The shower had 6 different nozzle settings. She chose the rainfall option and stood under water hot enough to turn her skin pink, washing away the cold and the fear and the grime of the last 20 hours. By the time she stepped out, she felt almost human again. The bed was obscenely comfortable. Claire slid between sheets that probably cost more than her first car and lay there in the dark, listening to the building's quiet sounds. The hum of heating vents, the distant rumble of the elevator, the city's muffled roar. For the first time in 10 years, she fell asleep without bracing for the sound of footsteps in the hall, for the door opening without permission, for the weight of violence about to descend. She fell asleep and dreamed of nothing at all. 6 a.m. came with a vengeance. Claire woke to the sound of small thundering feet, raised voices, and something that might have been someone falling down. She sat up, disoriented, taking in the unfamiliar room with its pre-dawn shadows and floor-to-ceiling windows, now revealing a steel-gray sky. Right, Pittsburgh, Julian Pierce, the penthouse. She dressed quickly in the only clean clothes she had, another pair of scrubs from her suitcase, because Derek had thrown out everything except her work uniforms, and followed the noise to the kitchen. Chaos. That was the only word for it. Julian stood at the stove in pajama pants and a t-shirt, trying to manage 4 pans at once while smoke billowed from something that might have been bacon. All 5 kids were at the island, talking over each other in a cacophony that made Claire's head ring. Asher was arguing with the Ampa about whose turn it was to use the blue bowl. Noah had apparently spilled juice on Lucas, and Sophie just sat there looking overwhelmed while everyone shouted around her. Julian turned, saw Claire, and something like relief flashed across his face. "Good morning. Coffee's in the pot. Fair warning, it's terrible." Claire poured herself a cup anyway, took one sip, and confirmed that yes, it was terrible. She set it down and moved to the stove where Julian was now actively burning eggs. "May I?" He stepped back without argument. Claire took over, salvaged what she could, started fresh batches where she couldn't. Within 10 minutes, she had presentable scrambled eggs, rescued bacon, and toast that wasn't charcoal. The kids had gone quiet, watching her work with varying degrees of suspicion and curiosity. "Who taught you to cook?" Lucas asked. "My mother, before she died." "Our mom died too," Sophie said softly. "I know, your dad told me." Emma's eyes narrowed. "Are you going to leave like the other nannies?" Claire flipped the eggs, considering her answer. She could promise to stay, but promises were easy to make and hard to keep. Instead, she said, "I'm not a nanny. I'm someone who needed help, and your dad was kind enough to offer it. I'm here as long as it makes sense for everyone." "That's a non-answer," Asher said, his tone sharp. "Yes," Claire agreed, "it is." Something in her honesty seemed to satisfy him, or at least diffuse his hostility. He nodded once and went back to his juice. Julian, leaning against the counter watching this exchange, caught her eye and mouthed, "Thank you." Breakfast was chaotic but functional. The kids ate, argued about Christmas presents again. Julian's face went tight at that, guilt written all over him, and then scattered to get ready for the day. Claire started cleaning up, loading the dishwasher with practiced efficiency, when Julian appeared at her elbow. "You don't have to do that." "I'm aware. I'm doing it anyway." He was quiet for a moment, then, "Thank you for this morning. I'm not good at the domestic stuff." "I noticed." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Sarah handled all of it. I handled work. It was a system that worked until it couldn't anymore." Claire rinsed a plate, choosing her words carefully. "Your kids are testing me. They'll keep testing me. I want you to know I understand why. They've been hurt. They don't trust easily anymore." "Neither do I," Claire said quietly, "so we'll figure it out together." Julian studied her for a long moment, and Claire had the uncomfortable sensation of being seen, really seen, not just looked at. Then Lucas came barreling into the kitchen, followed by Noah, both of them dressed in snow gear. "Dad, can we go play outside, please? It's Christmas morning. We should—" Julian stopped. "Actually, yes. Go, all of you. Burn off some energy." The kids cheered and thundered off to gather winter clothes. Julian looked at Claire. "I should probably supervise. Make sure no one loses a finger to frostbite or starts a snowball fight that ends in tears." "I'll come with you. Make sure you don't lose a finger to frostbite." They bundled up and took the private elevator down to street level, emerging into a Pittsburgh transformed by overnight snow. The courtyard behind Pierce Tower was usually empty, a decorative space for summer lunches, but today it was pristine white, untouched except for the tracks of early morning birds. The kids hit it like a natural disaster, immediately beginning the construction on what Lucas declared would be the biggest snowman in Pittsburgh history. Claire stood next to Julian, watching them work. They were good kids, she could tell, loud and chaotic and still raw from loss, but fundamentally good. Asher organized the construction with the efficiency of a site foreman. Emma packed snow with fierce determination. Noah and Lucas worked together to roll the base sphere, while Sophie gathered sticks for arms with quiet focus. "They're wonderful," Claire said. "They're a handful." "Those two things aren't mutually exclusive." Julian glanced at her, something thoughtful in his expression. "You're good with them. Natural." "I worked pediatrics for 3 years before I—" She stopped, caught herself. Before Derek decided her working gave her too much independence, too many opportunities to talk to people who might notice things. "Before?" "Before I left nursing. Personal reasons." Julian didn't push, and Claire was grateful. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the snowman take shape until Lucas called out that he needed Claire to come judge whether the head was big enough. She trudged over, made a show of serious consideration, and declared it perfect. Lucas beamed. When they finally went back inside an hour later, all of them pink-cheeked and damp, Claire felt something she hadn't felt in 10 years. Normal. Like she was part of something, even if only temporarily. Like maybe in this strange borrowed space with this strange borrowed family, she could remember what it felt like to be a person instead of a target. The rest of Christmas Day passed in a blur. Julian worked in his office. She could hear him on conference calls, his voice taking on a harder edge when he talked to someone named Victoria. The kids watched movies, played with the few gifts Julian had apparently panic-ordered overnight for express delivery, and slowly began to treat Claire less like an intruder and more like a fixture. When dinner time came, she found chicken breasts in the freezer and pasta in the pantry and made something that approximated a real meal. That night, after the kids were in bed, Julian found her in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already clean. He leaned against the doorframe, looking exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. "I need to ask you something." Claire set down the cloth. "Okay. What are you running from? Who hurt you?" She'd known the question was coming, had prepared herself for it, but hearing it out loud still made her chest tighten. "Does it matter?" "Yes. Because if someone's looking for you, I need to know. For my kid's safety." "Fair point." Claire wrapped her arms around herself, a protective gesture she'd learned long ago. "My husband, ex-husband, it's complicated." "Is he looking for you?" "Probably, but he doesn't know I'm here. No one knows I'm here except one person, and she won't tell." Julian was quiet, processing. The bruises, he did that. Among other things. For how long? 10 years. She watched his face do something complicated, anger, followed by quick control, followed by something that looked almost like pain. I'm sorry. It's over now. I made sure of it." "Good." He pushed off the doorframe, came closer but not too close, respecting the space she needed. "Claire, I meant what I said at the hospital. You're safe here. If he shows up, if anyone shows up, I'll handle it. You don't owe me that." "Maybe not, but I'm offering it anyway." They stood there in the kitchen, snow still falling outside the windows, the penthouse quiet except for the building's ambient sounds. Claire searched his face for signs of the trap, the catch, the moment when kindness would curdle into something else. But all she found was sincerity, tired and battered, but genuine. "Thank you," she said finally, "for all of this. You have no idea." "I think I do," Julian interrupted gently. "Get some rest. Tomorrow the kids have school, which means early mornings and lunch packing and a level of chaos you haven't experienced yet." Claire almost smiled. "I survived today. I can survive tomorrow." "That's the spirit." He left her there, disappeared down the hall to his own room, and Claire finished cleaning up even though there was nothing left to clean. When she finally made her way back to the guest room, she found a note slipped under her door. Julian's handwriting, precise and controlled. "Thank you for today. You gave my kids something I haven't been able to give them in 2 years, normal. Whatever you need, you have it." Claire folded the note carefully and tucked it into her suitcase, next to the locket that held her mother's picture. Then she climbed into that absurdly comfortable bed and lay there in the dark, thinking about how strange life was, how you could go from sitting on a frozen bench with nothing to sleeping in a penthouse with everything in the span of a single evening. She wanted to trust this, wanted to believe Julian Pierce was exactly what he seemed, a grieving widower trying to hold his family together, offering help because he needed it as much as she did. But trust was a luxury she'd lost a long time ago, beaten out of her one careful lesson at a time. So instead of trusting, she made herself a different promise. Stay alert. Stay careful. Stay ready to run the moment this turned into something she recognized. But tonight, just for tonight, she'd let herself sleep without fear. And in his room down the hall, Julian Pierce lay awake thinking about the woman he'd brought into his home, about the bruises on her wrists and the careful way she moved through space like she was always calculating escape routes. He thought about Sarah, about what she'd say if she could see him now, and decided she'd probably approve even if his board of directors wouldn't. He'd made a choice tonight. Not a smart one, maybe not even a good one, but a choice that felt like the first honest thing he'd done in 2 years. He'd seen someone who needed help, and he'd helped. No calculations, no risk assessment, just action. Tomorrow he'd deal with Victoria and the board and the Kellerman merger and all the other machinery of his carefully constructed life. But tonight he'd remember what it felt like to be human instead of just a CEO. It was a start. And sometimes, a start was enough. The first week passed in a series of small battles Claire won through sheer patience. Asher tested her by ignoring every request she made, walking past her like she was furniture. Emma hid things, shoes, homework, Claire's own belongings, and watched with satisfaction as Claire searched, never breaking, never getting angry. Noah barely spoke, just observed with those careful eyes that saw too much. Lucas wanted to trust, but held back, taking his cues from his siblings. Sophie cried at night, muffled sounds that leaked under her door, stopping the moment Claire knocked to check on her. Claire didn't push, didn't demand affection or gratitude or even basic cooperation. She just showed up, made breakfast that was edible instead of burnt, packed lunches with notes tucked inside. Simple things, drawings of suns or smiley faces, nothing that required response. Learned their rhythms and preferences without asking, just watching. Asher hated mayonnaise. Emma only ate strawberry jam. Noah needed his sandwiches cut diagonal, not straight. Lucas drank juice boxes like water. Sophie picked at her food unless it was arranged a specific way, separate foods never touching. By day 5, Lucas was the first to crack. He appeared in the doorway of the laundry room where Claire was folding towels, holding a piece of paper wrinkled from being clenched too hard. "Can you help me?" Claire set down the towel. "Of course, what do you need?" He showed her the paper. A school assignment. Draw your family. The instructions were typed at the top, due date circled in red. Lucas had started and stopped multiple times, eraser marks tearing small holes in the paper. "I don't remember what Mom looks like anymore. I try to picture her face, but it's all blurry." The admission came out in a rush, followed by immediate panic, like he'd said something forbidden. Claire knelt down, bringing herself to his eye level. "That's okay. That happens when people are gone for a while. It doesn't mean you're forgetting her. It just means your brain is making room for new things. Dad has pictures in his office, my nurse. Should we ask if you can see them?" They found Julian at his desk, surrounded by file folders and the blue glow of 2 computer monitors. He looked up when they knocked, reading the situation instantly in the way Lucas clutched the homework page. "Come in." Julian pulled out a framed photo from his desk drawer, handling it with care that suggested he looked at it often. Sarah Pierce smiled out at them, holding 5 swaddled newborns, her face exhausted and radiant in equal measure. Lucas stared at it, memorizing features. She was pretty. "She was beautiful," Julian corrected gently. "Inside especially, you have her eyes. Do I have anything else of hers?" Something crossed Julian's face, grief, raw and immediate, gone just as fast. "You have her kindness, her ability to see the good in people even when they're not showing it." Claire felt like an intruder witnessing this, but Lucas glanced at her, including her somehow. "Miss Claire says it's okay that I don't remember her face perfectly, that it's normal." Julian's gaze shifted to her, holding for a beat too long. "Miss Claire is right. Your mom wouldn't want you to carry that guilt. Can I take the picture just to my room, just to draw from?" "Yes, but bring it back, okay? I need it too." Lucas left with the photo clutched carefully in both hands. Claire started to follow, but Julian's voice stopped her at the door. "Thank you for that, for knowing what to say. I didn't do anything special. You did. I've been freezing every time they ask about Sarah. Can't find words that don't hurt to say out loud. But you just talked to him like it was normal." Claire leaned against the door frame, studying this man who commanded boardrooms but fell apart when his children needed to discuss their mother. "It is normal. Grief isn't something you finish. It's something you learn to live with." "How do you know?" "Because I've lost people too. Different circumstances, but the feeling is the same." Julian looked like he wanted to ask more, but his phone buzzed with an incoming call. Victoria Chen, the screen read. He glanced at it, glanced at Claire, and let it go to voicemail. That's the fourth time she's called today. Work? Work that can wait. He closed his laptop with deliberate finality. What are the kids doing? Homework. Well, attempting homework. Emma threw a tantrum about long division 20 minutes ago. Let me guess, she told you to go away and leave her alone? In slightly more colorful language, yes. Julian almost smiled. That's actually progress. Last nanny, she just threw things. They walked to the living area together, found Emma still scowling at her math textbook while Noah worked silently beside her. Asher had claimed the far corner of the sectional, reading something above his grade level as usual. Sophie was building an elaborate structure from blocks, her focus absolute. Claire settled on the floor next to Emma, not asking permission, just picking up a pendulum and pulling over scratch paper. Long division is the worst. Want me to show you a trick? Emma's eyes narrowed with suspicion, but curiosity won. What kind of trick? My mom called it the house method. You draw a little house and the numbers live in different rooms. 10 minutes later, Emma was working through problems on her own, occasionally asking questions that came out less hostile than before. When she finished the page, she looked at Claire sideways, almost shy. That was actually helpful. You're welcome. I still think you're going to leave. Claire met her gaze directly. I probably will eventually. Everyone does, but not today. Emma considered this brutal honesty, then nodded once and went back to her textbook. Across the room, Julian watched this exchange with an expression Claire couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, mixed with something that looked like hope. That night, after the kids were asleep, Julian found Claire in the kitchen making tea. She'd found a box of chamomile in the back of a cabinet, was steeping it in a chipped mug that looked wildly out of place among the designer dishware. Where did that mug come from? Claire held it up, back corner behind the martini glasses. It says, "World's OK's Dad." I'm assuming one of the kids made it. Lucas, 3 years ago, for Father's Day. Sarah kept it even though the glaze came out lumpy. It's perfect. They stood in the kitchen, the city lights sprawling below them through the windows, and something about the late hour made the space feel smaller, more intimate. Julian poured himself bourbon from a crystal decanter, neat, and settled onto one of the bar stools. How bad was it today? Scale of 1 to 10. 6 maybe. Emma had a rough afternoon, but we worked through it. Asher is still pretending I don't exist, but I caught him actually listening when I was explaining something to Noah. Progress. Slow progress, Claire agreed, but still progress. Julian swirled the bourbon, watching it catch the light. I want to ask you something, and you can tell me it's none of my business. Okay? The bruises are fading, but you still move like you're expecting to be hit. Flinch when people get too close. You ever gonna tell me the full story? Claire wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the heat seep into her palms. She'd known this conversation would come eventually, had prepared for it, but the actual moment of deciding whether to trust still felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. His name was Derek Winters. We were married for 10 years. Julian went very still, the way people do when they sense they're about to hear something that will change how they see the world. I was 19 when we met, 20 when we married. He was 30, successful, charming when he wanted to be. My father thought it was a brilliant match. Derek owned a logistics company, had money and connections. I was a nursing student with no prospects. Dad made it clear I should be grateful. And were you? At first, Derek could be wonderful in the beginning. Flowers, nice dinners, talking about our future. I thought I'd won some kind of lottery. Claire took a sip of tea that had gone lukewarm. The first time he hit me was 6 months after the wedding. I'd bought groceries he didn't like. He said I was wasteful, stupid, that I needed to be taught a lesson. She kept her voice flat, clinical, reciting facts instead of living them. Julian's knuckles had gone white where he gripped the glass. It got worse from there, slowly so I could adjust to each new normal. He controlled everything, what I wore, who I talked to, where I went. Made me quit nursing school because he said I didn't need to work. He'd provide everything, which really meant he wanted me isolated, dependent, with no escape route. Why didn't you leave? Where would I go? Dad had made it clear he was done with me once I married. I had no money, no charm, no friends anymore because Derek had systematically cut off every relationship I had, and he was very good at making me believe I deserved it, that I was broken, worthless, that no one else would ever want me because I couldn't even do the one thing wives were supposed to do. Which was? Claire's throat tightened. This was the part she'd never said out loud, not even to Dr. Grace. Give him a child. I couldn't get pregnant. Years trying, nothing happening. Derek convinced me it was my fault, my body failing him, that I owed him everything else to make up for that one crucial inadequacy. Julian set down his glass with controlled precision, like he was afraid what would happen if he moved too fast. Tell me he's in prison. Tell me someone made him pay. He's not. He's free, probably still running his company, still presenting himself as a respectable businessman. Claire met Julian's eyes, saw fury there, carefully banked. But I'm free too, that's what matters. How did you get out? I finally got pregnant after 10 years. I couldn't believe it, was terrified to hope it was real. I waited to tell him, wanted to be sure, didn't want to disappoint him one more time if it turned out to be false hope. She paused, the memory sharp enough to cut. Julian waited, not pushing, just present. We went to a charity gala. Derek's business partner told me I looked nice. I smiled. That was my crime, smiling at another man. On the drive home, Derek was quiet, which was always worse than yelling. When we got home, he locked the door and asked me if I was having an affair. I told him no, of course not. I would never. He didn't believe me. The words came faster now, needing to be said and finished before she lost her nerve. He hit me, harder than usual. I was begging him to stop, trying to explain, and finally I told him about the baby because I thought it would make him stop, make him understand, make him be gentle. Julian's breathing had changed, gone shallow and careful. But he didn't believe that either. Called me a liar, said I was trying to trap him with another man's bastard. And then her voice broke. She took a breath, forced it steady. He kicked me, in the stomach, multiple times. I woke up in the hospital 12 hours later. The doctors told me there was no baby anymore, that there would never be a baby, that the damage was too severe. The kitchen was silent except for the ambient hum of expensive appliances. Julian's face had gone pale, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscle jump. That's when I decided to die. Not literally, but effectively. I had a doctor, Dr. Grace Moreno. She'd been documenting the abuse for years, knew what Derek was doing even though I never officially reported it. She helped me disappear, gave me money, helped me get my mother's maiden name on new identification, sent me somewhere Derek wouldn't think to look. Here, I got on a bus with everything I owned in one bag, planning to start over in a city where no one knew Vanessa Winters. But the bag got stolen my first day. Everything Dr. Grace had given me, gone. I'd been sitting on that bench for 4 hours trying to figure out if I had the courage to walk into the emergency room and ask for help or if I should just keep walking until the cold made the decision for me. Claire looked down at her hands, at the faded yellow-green remnants of Derek's last lesson. And then you stopped. Julian was quiet for a long moment, processing, sorting through everything she'd laid out. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion, held barely in check. I want to find him. I want to make him hurt the way he hurt you. Don't. He's not worth it. And I don't want you tangled up in my past. Claire, I mean it, Julian. I'm telling you this because you asked, because you deserve to know who's living in your home. But I don't want revenge. I just want to be free. I want to wake up and not be afraid. I want to live a life that belongs to me instead of being shaped by someone else's cruelty. He reached across the counter, not grabbing her hand, but placing his own near enough that she could take it if she wanted. She didn't, but she also didn't pull away. You're safe here. I promised you that the first night, and I mean it. If Derek Winters shows up, if anyone shows up threatening you, I will handle it. You don't owe me protection. No, Julian agreed, but I'm offering it anyway. Not because you need saving, but because he trailed off, searching for words. Because I can. because I have resources and leverage in a name that means something in this city, and because Sarah would have done the same thing. Claire finally let herself look at him fully, this man who'd become something more than just an employer in the span of a week. There was nothing predatory in his concern, nothing that set off the alarm bells Derek had installed in her nervous system. Just genuine care from someone who understood loss in his own way. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for listening, for not making me feel like I should have done something different. You survived. That's not nothing." They sat in the kitchen until Claire's tea went cold and Julian's bourbon sat forgotten, talking about easier things, the kids, the city, favorite books and movies, small details that built the scaffolding of actual acquaintance. When Claire finally said goodnight and retreated to her room, she felt lighter despite having open wounds she'd thought were better left sealed. And Julian, alone in his room with the city lights painting shadows across his ceiling, thought about the woman down the hall and the violence she'd endured and the quiet strength it took to keep going anyway. He thought about how she'd handled Lucas today, how she'd worked through Emma's hostility with patience instead of force. He thought about the way she moved through his home like she was memorizing exit routes even while making herself useful. He thought about how she'd said Derek's name, flat affect, no emotion, the way people discussed natural disasters or traffic accidents, things that happened to them, not things they'd participated in. Julian picked up his phone, pulled up his contacts, found the name he wanted. Marcus Reed, his personal attorney, who handled everything from contract disputes to estate planning. Technically, it was the middle of the night, but Marcus billed enough to answer whenever Julian called. The phone rang twice. "Julian, it's 1 in the morning. Someone better be bleeding. I need you to look into someone. Derek Winters runs a logistics company, probably based in or around Maryland. I want to know everything, business dealings, legal history, anything that suggests he's got vulnerabilities." Marcus was silent for a beat. "This about the woman you've got living with you?" Victoria mentioned something about new household staff. "It's not Victoria's business. Everything's her business when you're suspended from daily operations, Julian. Board's getting nervous. James has been calling me asking if you're mentally stable." Julian closed his eyes, pushed down the flash of anger. "My father can go to hell, and I'm not suspended. I'm on temporary leave to handle family matters." Semantics. Either way, they're circling. You bring in some mystery woman with no background check, no references, and Victoria's making noise about fiduciary responsibility and protecting company interests. Then you tell Victoria that my personal life is off limits and my company shares still give me controlling interest. She can make all the noise she wants. I'm not going anywhere. Stubborn as ever. All right, I'll dig into Winters. But Julian, be careful. Whatever you're doing, make sure it's worth the fight that's coming. Julian ended the call and lay in the dark thinking about fights and what made them worth having. He'd spent 2 years avoiding confrontation, saying yes to the board and Victoria and his father, taking the path of least resistance because it was easier than caring about outcomes. But tonight, hearing what Claire had survived, he felt something crack open in his chest. Not just anger at Derek Winters, though there was plenty of that, but anger at his own passivity, his own willingness to let life happen to him instead of making choices. Tomorrow he'd deal with Victoria and the board. Tomorrow he'd face whatever consequences came from putting Claire before company politics. But tonight he'd made a decision that felt right in a way nothing had felt right since Sarah died. And that had to count for something. Morning came too early. Claire woke to her alarm, already hearing movement in the kids' wing, the daily race for the bathroom, the inevitable arguments about who wore whose socks. She dressed and emerged to find Julian attempting breakfast again with the same disastrous results as the first day. "You really need to stop trying to cook." He looked up from the smoking pan, sheepish. "Hope springs eternal." Claire took over, had actual food ready by the time the kids thundered in. The morning routine had smoothed out over the week. Lunches packed, backpacks checked, minor disputes mediated, until they were all out the door and into the car Julian drove when he was playing dad instead of CEO. But when they returned to the penthouse after drop-off, Victoria Chen was waiting in the lobby. She was everything Claire wasn't. Polished, severe, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Derek had spent on Claire's entire wardrobe over 10 years. Her eyes assessed Claire with the cold efficiency of someone used to identifying and eliminating threats. Julian, we need to talk. Not now, Victoria. Yes, now. The Kellerman deal is falling apart because you've been MIA for a week. James is calling emergency board sessions, and you've apparently hired household staff without any vetting or background checks. Her gaze slid to Claire, dismissive, which is both personally reckless and a professional liability. Claire felt herself shrink slightly, old reflexes kicking in, become smaller, less noticeable. Don't provoke. But Julian moved between them, physically blocking Victoria's line of sight. Claire is none of your concern, neither is my household. And you can tell my father that if he wants to discuss my personal life, he can come here and do it to my face instead of sending you as his messenger. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something sharpened in her eyes. I'm not his messenger. I'm your COO, and I'm trying to protect this company from your increasingly questionable judgment. You want to have a midlife crisis? Fine. But don't drag Pierce Holdings down with you. Are we done? No, board meeting Friday at 10. Don't be late, and don't bring her. Victoria left without waiting for a response, heels clicking sharp staccato across marble. Claire waited until the elevator doors closed. I'm causing problems for Mario. Victoria causes problems. You're just living your life. Julian, if I'm making things difficult, you're not. He turned to face her fully. Victoria's been angling for more control since Sarah died. She thinks I'm vulnerable, distracted, that she can leverage that into a power play. She's probably right about the vulnerable part, but that doesn't mean I'm going to let her dictate how I run my household. She called me a professional liability. She calls everyone a liability who isn't directly serving her agenda. Ignore her. But Claire couldn't ignore it. Couldn't ignore the way Victoria had looked at her, like Claire was something stuck to the bottom of an expensive shoe. She'd spent 10 years being looked at like that by Derek, being told she was worthless and believing it, and she'd promised herself she wouldn't live under that weight again. I need to get a real job, not just helping with your kids, something that's mine. Julian started to protest, then seemed to understand. What kind of work? Nursing, it's what I'm trained for, what I'm good at. I've been out of practice for 5 years, but I kept my license active. I can start with something part-time, work my way back. All right, I'll make some calls, see what... No. The word came out harder than she'd meant it. Claire softened her tone. Thank you, but no. I need to do this myself. I need to know I can walk into a hospital and get hired on my own merit, not because Julian Pierce made a phone call. Something flickered in his expression. Respect, maybe, or understanding. Okay, but if you need a reference or anything that's not me pulling strings, let me know. I will. Claire spent that afternoon updating her resume, reaching out to Pittsburgh General's HR department, filling out applications that asked for employment gaps she had to carefully navigate. She listed her Maryland experience, explained the 5-year absence as personal circumstances, and hoped it would be enough. 3 days later, she had an interview. The nurse manager was a woman named Patricia Hayes, mid-50s, with kind eyes and the efficient manner of someone who'd seen every type of crisis emergency departments produced. Your resume is strong, but that gap is concerning. 5 years out of practice is a long time. I understand, I can explain. You don't have to. I've been doing this job for 20 years. I know what personal circumstances usually means, especially when they coincide with the change of address and name. Patricia's voice gentled. The question is whether you're ready to be back. Claire met her gaze directly. I'm ready. I'm good at this work. I care about it, and I need something that's mine again. Not something someone gave me or allowed me to have. Something I earned. Patricia studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Part-time to start. 3 12-hour shifts a week, mostly nights. You'll be under supervision for the first month. If you can handle the pace and demonstrate competency, we'll talk about full-time. Yes, absolutely yes, thank you. Walking out of that hospital with an employment offer felt like the first real breath Claire had taken since leaving Maryland. She was going to work again, going to use her training, earn her own money, Build something that Derek couldn't take away even in memory. She came home, and when had she started thinking of the penthouse as home, to find Julian in his office looking exhausted. She knocked on the doorframe. Bad day? Board meeting tomorrow. Victoria's been laying groundwork for weeks, apparently. She's going to push for me to take a longer leave of absence, maybe even suggest I step down as CEO entirely. Can she do that? With enough votes, yes. My father will back her if he thinks it's in the company's best interest. And I've given them plenty of ammunition lately, skipping meetings, being unavailable, refusing to prioritize the Kellerman deal. He rubbed his face. And having you here, Victoria's made you into evidence of my instability. Claire's stomach dropped. Then I should leave. If I'm the problem, you're not the problem. Julian stood, came around the desk. Victoria is. My father is. A system that demands I sacrifice everything personal for professional success is. But you've been the first good thing to happen to this family in 2 years. Your kids are still testing me. Asher barely speaks to me. Asher barely spoke to the last 4 nannies at all. With you, he at least acknowledges your existence. That's progress. They stood there in the office doorway, close enough that Claire could smell his cologne. Something understated and expensive. She should step back, maintain proper boundaries, but she found herself frozen in place. I got the job at Pittsburgh General, part-time, night shifts. Something crossed Julian's face that looked almost like disappointment before it shifted to genuine pleasure. That's fantastic. Congratulations. Thank you. I start next week. She hesitated, then added, I'll still help with the kids when I can. I know that was part of our arrangement. The arrangement was that you needed a place to stay and I needed help. You've held up your end. If you want to focus on your work now, that's fine. I don't want to. I want to work, but I also want to. Claire caught herself, unsure how to finish that sentence. What did she want? To stay? To keep being part of this strange improvised family? To keep having late-night conversations with a man who looked at her like she mattered instead of like she was property? Julian saved her from having to articulate it. Stay, please. The kids need you. I need you. Not as an employee, just as someone who's here. Someone who makes this place feel less empty. The admission hung between them, vulnerable in a way Claire suspected Julian didn't allow himself often. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the physical distance that felt increasingly artificial, but years of Derek had taught her to be careful with touch, with presuming welcome. Instead, she just nodded. Okay, I'll stay. Relief washed across his features, there and gone. Good. Now let's go survive the kids' homework hour before I have to spend full night preparing for Victoria's attempted coup. They found the kids in various states of academic struggle. Emma was crying over the science project. Noah had given up on his reading worksheet entirely, and Lucas was trying to help Sophie with math despite not understanding the concepts himself. Asher sat apart from everyone, working independently, but Claire noticed he kept glancing over, tracking the chaos without participating. She and Julian divided and conquered, Julian helping Noah sound out words while Claire salvaged Emma's project and explained fractions to Sophie with props involving actual fruit from the kitchen. By the time they'd worked through everyone's assignments, it was past dinner time, so they ordered pizza and ate it on the living room floor like a picnic. This is nice, Sophie said quietly, and the statement landed with unexpected weight. Because it was nice. It was just dinner on the floor with paper plates, nothing special, but it felt normal in a way the formal dining room with its designer table never had. It felt like a family instead of people occupying the same space. After the kids went to bed, Claire retreated to her room but couldn't settle. She kept thinking about Victoria Chen's cold assessment, about Julian's board meeting tomorrow, about how precarious this whole situation was. She'd gotten too comfortable here, started to believe this could last, and that was dangerous. Nothing lasted. People left or turned cruel or proved themselves unreliable. That was the lesson Derek had taught her, reinforced over 10 years until it became fundamental truth. Her phone buzzed. She'd gotten a new one, pay-as-you-go from the corner store, and had given the number to exactly 3 people. Dr. Grace, Pittsburgh General HR, and Julian. The text was from a number she didn't recognize. Vanessa. I know where you are. We need to talk. D. Claire's hands went numb. The phone slipped through her fingers, bounced on the carpet. She stared at it like it might explode, her pulse suddenly thundering in her ears. He found her. Derek found her. Somehow, despite everything, despite Dr. Grace's careful planning and the new identity and the distance, he'd tracked her down, which meant he'd been looking, had probably never stopped looking, and now he knew she was in Pittsburgh, and it was only a matter of time before a knock at her door. Claire flinched hard enough to hurt her shoulder. Claire, you okay? Julian's voice, concerned but not demanding. She couldn't make herself answer, couldn't make her throat work. The door opened slowly. She'd forgotten to lock it, stupid. Always lock the door. And Julian stepped inside, taking in her frozen posture, her shallow breathing, the phone face up on the floor showing Derek's message. He picked it up, read it, and his entire body went rigid. When did this come? Just now. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Julian's jaw worked. He looked at the phone, at her, making calculations. Pack a bag, essential things only. We're leaving in 10 minutes. What? Where? Somewhere he can't find you. Somewhere safe. It doesn't matter. Just pack. Now. Claire's brain wouldn't engage. She just stood there, shaking, while Julian pulled out her suitcase and started grabbing clothes from the closet, moving with focused efficiency that suggested he'd done this before, knew how to evacuate under pressure. Julian, I can't drag you into this. I'll just leave. I'll go somewhere else. You're not going anywhere alone. He turned to face her, his expression harder than she'd ever seen it. Derek Winters threatened you. That makes it my problem. Now pack or I'll pack for you, but either way we're leaving before he decides a text isn't enough. Something about his certainty cut through Claire's panic. She moved to help, throwing essentials into the bag. Clothes, toiletries, the locket she never took off. Julian disappeared and returned with a duffel of his own, already packed, like he kept a go-bag ready for emergencies. The kids, I'm calling Patricia Chen, not Victoria, he added quickly, seeing Claire's expression. Patricia's my neighbor. The kids know her. She's safe. They can stay there overnight. You're going to wake them up and move them because of me. I'm getting my children away from a potential threat. There's a difference. He was already texting, getting responses. Patricia says yes. Get your bag. The next 30 minutes were a blur. Julian woke 5 confused, sleepy children and told them they were having an unexpected sleepover at Miss Patricia's. Lucas asked why, Emma complained, but Asher just looked at Claire and seemed to understand that something bad was happening. They shuffled across the hall in their pajamas, and Julian said something quiet to Patricia that made her nod seriously and close the door fast. Then they were in the Range Rover, pulling out of the parking garage, and Julian was driving with the focused intensity of someone who'd calculated 3 moves ahead. They got on the highway heading north, and Claire finally found her voice. Where are we going? I have a place, a cabin about 2 hours outside the city. No one knows about it except Marcus, my attorney. Bought it under an LLC, untraceable to me personally. I go there sometimes when I need to think. This is insane. You're running away with me based on one text. I'm keeping you safe based on a credible threat from an abusive ex-husband. Julian glanced at her, his profile sharp in the dashboard lights. Claire, he found your burner phone number. That means he's got resources, probably hired someone to track you. A text is just the beginning. Tomorrow it could be him showing up at the hospital, at the penthouse, anywhere you are. So we're removing you from the equation until I can figure out how to remove him permanently. You can't. Watch me. They drove in silence after that, Claire staring out the window at darkness, broken by occasional lights, trying to process how fast everything had shifted. This morning she'd gotten a job, had felt like maybe she was building something stable. Now she was fleeing into the night with a man she'd known for 2 weeks, running from a past she'd thought she'd escaped. The cabin, when they finally reached it, was nothing like the penthouse. Small, wood frame, nestled in trees with a gravel drive and no visible neighbors. Julian unlocked it and turned on lights that revealed sparse furniture, a stone fireplace, walls lined with books. It looked like a place someone came to be alone. There's only one bedroom, Bob, he said, already moving toward it with his duffel. You take it. I'll sleep on the couch. Julian, I can't. Yes, you can. Just for tonight. Tomorrow we figure out next steps. He turned to face her fully. I'm not letting Derek Winters have you back. I don't care what I have to do to stop him, but I'm not letting him hurt you again. The words settled over Claire like a promise she desperately wanted to believe, but couldn't quite trust. She'd heard promises before. Derek had promised to love and cherish her. Her father had promised he was making the right choice. Dr. Grace had promised she'd be safe if she just got far enough away. But Julian was different. Julian had stopped his car on Christmas Eve. Julian had taken her in, fed her, given his children over to her care. Julian was standing here now, having packed up his entire life in 30 minutes because of a text message threatening her safety. Why are you doing this? The question came out raw. You barely know me. I'm just some woman you found on a bench. Why risk everything for me? Julian was quiet for a long moment, the cabin silent except for wind in the trees outside. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and certain. Because when I look at you, I see someone who survived something I can't imagine and came out the other side still willing to be kind to my children. I see someone who packs school lunches with little notes and doesn't get angry when Emma says cruel things. I see someone strong enough to leave everything behind and start over with nothing. He paused. And because I'm tired of standing by while bad things happen to good people. Sarah died and I couldn't stop it. But you're still here, and Derek Winters doesn't get to change that. Claire felt something crack inside her chest, something that had been frozen solid for years. Tears burned at her eyes and she couldn't stop them. Didn't want to stop them. Julian moved closer, not touching, but present, and she folded into his arms without planning to, just needing something solid to hold on to. He held her while she cried, didn't say anything, just let her break down in his kitchen. Their kitchen, for however long this fragile safety lasted. And for the first time since leaving Maryland, Claire let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, there were still good people in the world who kept their promises. Morning came through unfamiliar windows, pale light filtering through pine branches instead of city towers. Claire woke disoriented, took 3 seconds to remember where she was and why. The cabin bedroom was small, functional, with none of the luxuries she'd grown accustomed to at the penthouse. She could hear Julian moving in the kitchen, the smell of coffee drifting through the thin walls. She found him at the stove, actually succeeding at breakfast for once. Scrambled eggs that looked edible, toast that wasn't charcoal. He glanced up when she appeared. You slept? Some, you? Enough. He plated the eggs, handed her one. Marcus is coming up this afternoon. I called him last night after you went to bed. He's bringing information on Derek, and we need to talk about legal options. Claire accepted the plate but couldn't make herself eat. What kind of options? Restraining order, for starters. If Derek's threatening you, that's grounds for legal protection. Marcus also looked into Derek's business. Apparently, Winters Logistics has some questionable practices. OSHA violations, wage disputes, a lawsuit from a former employee alleging workplace retaliation. Nothing that's stuck so far, but enough to suggest he's not as untouchable as he thinks. A restraining order won't stop him. He'll see it as a challenge. Maybe, but it creates a legal record, makes it harder for him to claim he's just a concerned husband looking for his missing wife. Julian set down his fork, met her eyes. Claire, I know you're scared. I know you think running is safer than fighting. But Derek already found you once. He'll find you again unless we make it clear that coming after you has consequences. She wanted to argue, to insist that fighting Derek was futile because he always won. That was how their marriage had worked for 10 years. But sitting in this cabin with Julian calmly discussing legal strategy like it was a board meeting made her realize something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't alone anymore, wasn't making decisions in a vacuum of fear and isolation. Okay, I'll talk to Marcus. But Julian, if this gets messy, if Derek tries to hurt you or the company, then we deal with it. Together. The words settled between them with weight it hadn't carried before. Together implied partnership, implied Claire wasn't just a temporary guest, but someone who'd become integral enough to defend. She wasn't sure when that transition had happened, only that it had. They ate in silence, then cleaned up side by side in the small kitchen. movements synchronized from 2 weeks of shared routines. Julian's phone buzzed with messages, Victoria wanting to know where he was, Patricia asking if the kids could stay another night, Asher texting to ask if Miss Claire was okay. That last one made Claire's throat tighten. He never texts you about anything. First time for everything. Julian typed a response, showed it to her. She's fine. Be home soon. He's worried about you. They all must think I'm causing chaos in their lives. They think you're part of their lives now. There's a difference. Before Claire could process that, the sound of tires on gravel announced Marcus Reed's arrival. He emerged from a Mercedes sedan, carrying a leather briefcase, and the wary expression of someone who'd been summoned to strange locations before, but still found this one concerning. Julian, Miss Morgan, he nodded to each of them. Let's talk inside. They settled around the cabin's small dining table, Marcus spreading documents with practiced efficiency. He was 50s, silver-haired, with the sharp eyes of someone who made his living reading between lines. Derek Winters, 35, owns Winters Logistics based in Annapolis, Maryland. Revenue approximately $8 million annually, mostly government contracts and commercial freight. Married once to Vanessa Elena Carter Winters, marriage certificate filed 2014, no divorce decree on record. He looked at Claire. Legally, you are still his wife. That can't be right. You left, but you never filed for divorce, which means Derek can claim this is a missing persons case, that he's concerned about his wife's well-being. The text he sent isn't technically threatening, just requesting contact. Any halfway decent lawyer will argue he's exercising his rights as a spouse. Claire felt the walls closing in. So I have no protection. I didn't say that. I said we need to be strategic. Marcus pulled out another file. Your Grace Moreno provided us with medical records spanning your entire marriage. Documentation of fractures, contusions, miscarriage resulting from abdominal trauma. Hospital records show you presented to emergency rooms 6 times over 10 years with injuries inconsistent with your stated explanations. Julian's hands had curled into fists on the table. Marcus continued, clinical and detached. This is evidence of long-term domestic violence. Combined with your testimony, it's enough to petition for divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty and to request a protective order preventing Derek from contacting you. The challenge is that filing these documents makes your location officially known. Derek will get served, will know exactly where you are. Then he'll come for me. Possibly. Which is why we file in Pittsburgh, where you've established residency, and we do it with enough public attention that Derek would be taking a significant risk to approach you directly. Marcus leaned forward. Mr. Winters is a businessman who depends on government contracts. Domestic violence allegations, especially ones backed by medical evidence, would be devastating to his reputation. His company could lose contracts, face investigations. We make it clear that coming after you costs him everything he's built. Claire tried to wrap her mind around this, turning her private nightmare into public record, exposing Derek's violence to scrutiny, gambling that shame and financial pressure would accomplish what restraining orders and legal boundaries couldn't. It meant admitting to the world what she'd hidden for a decade. It meant accepting that people would judge her for staying, for not leaving sooner, for all the choices that looked obvious from the outside but felt impossible from within. I'll do it. File everything. I want a divorce. I want legal protection. And I want Derek to know I'm not his property anymore. Marcus nodded, pulling out forms. We'll need your signature on multiple documents. Fair warning, this will move quickly once we file. Derek will be served within days, and his response will tell us what we're dealing with. They spent the next hour signing papers, Claire recounting details she'd tried to forget while Marcus typed notes with clinical precision. Julian sat beside her the entire time, a steady presence that kept her grounded when the memories threatened to pull her under. When Marcus finally packed up his briefcase, he paused at the door. Miss Morgan, I've handled dozens of domestic violence cases. The fact that you survived 10 years and got out takes more courage than most people will ever understand. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. After he left, Claire stood at the window watching his car disappear down the gravel drive. She felt scraped raw, exposed in ways she hadn't anticipated. Julian approached from behind, close enough that she could feel his warmth but not touching. You okay? No, but I will be. She turned to face him. I need to ask you something. What happens when this is over? When Derek is dealt with and I'm legally free and your life goes back to normal? Where does that leave me? The question had been building for days, maybe longer. Claire needed to know if this, them, whatever they were becoming, had an expiration date or if Julian saw something beyond crisis management. Where do you want it to leave you? I don't know. 2 weeks ago, I was homeless and terrified. Now I'm living in a penthouse, working at a hospital, helping raise 5 kids who aren't mine. It feels like I'm playing house in someone else's life. Julian moved closer until they were separated by less than a foot. Those kids ask about you constantly. Lucas wants to know if you're coming back. Sophie barely ate dinner last night because she was worried. Even Asher asked Patricia if you were safe, which is more emotion than he's shown about anyone since Sarah died. That's different. They've lost their mother. They're clinging to any adult who shows up consistently. Maybe. Or maybe they recognize something I've been trying to ignore for days. His voice dropped lower, more intimate. You're not playing house, Claire. You're building one with us, and I don't want you to leave when this is over. The admission hung in the air between them, vulnerable and dangerous. Claire searched his face for signs of obligation or pity, found neither. Just raw honesty from a man who didn't seem capable of anything less. Your board thinks I'm a liability. Victoria hates me. Your father probably wants me gone. And Derek is out there planning God knows what. How is any of this sustainable? I don't care what Victoria thinks. The board answers to me, not the other way around. And Derek Winters can try whatever he wants. He'll find out I have resources he can't match. Julian reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. I care what you think, what you want. Do you want to stay? Claire looked down at their joined hands, his larger and calloused from weekend carpentry projects he'd mentioned, hers smaller and still bearing faint scars. She thought about the penthouse that had started to feel like home, about 5 kids who'd stopped testing her and started including her, about late-night conversations and shared meals and the way Julian looked at her sometimes like she was something precious instead of broken. I'm terrified of wanting things, she admitted quietly. Every time I've wanted something, it got taken away or used against me. But yes, I want to stay. Julian's grip tightened fractionally. Then stay. We'll deal with everything else as it comes. They stood like that for a long moment, hands linked, until Claire's phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Grace. Marcus contacted me. I sent everything. Be brave, sweetheart. You've already survived the worst part. Claire hoped that was true. Hoped the worst was behind her and not still coming in whatever form Derek chose for retaliation. They drove back to Pittsburgh that evening, arrived at the penthouse to find 5 children who exploded out of Patricia's apartment with accusations and demands and relief so obvious it made Claire's chest ache. Lucas attached himself to her waist and wouldn't let go. Sophie cried into her shoulder. Even Emma managed a grudging hug before retreating to teenage coolness. Asher was last, hanging back until his siblings dispersed. He approached Claire with careful deliberation, studying her face for damage. Are you okay? Dad wouldn't tell us anything except that you needed space. I'm okay. Someone from my past tried to contact me and it scared me, but your dad helped. The person who hurt you? Claire blinked, surprised. Asher's expression was serious, older than 8 years should allow. How did you know someone hurt me? You move it like people do after they've been hit. My mom worked with abuse victims sometimes. She taught us how to recognize the signs, said we should always be kind because we don't know what someone's surviving. His jaw set with determination that was pure Julian. If that person comes here, we'll protect you. Asher, I mean it. Lucas already has a plan involving his baseball bat, and Noah's ready to call 911 on speed dial. Emma says she'll bite anyone who tries to hurt you. We talked about it. Claire felt tears threatening, pushed them back. You guys are 8. You shouldn't be worrying about protecting adults. You protect us every day. Fair is fair. He walked away before she could respond, leaving Claire standing in the foyer trying to process that these children, these grieving, difficult, wonderful children, had decided she was worth defending. Julian found her there 10 minutes later, still frozen. What happened? Your kids have a battle plan for if Derek shows up, involving baseball bats and 911. Something that might have been pride crossed his face. Sounds like them. Sarah used to say they were small but fierce. Guess she was right. The next morning brought reality crashing back. Julian had to attend the board meeting he had been avoiding, face Victoria and his father, and whatever political maneuvering had been happening in his absence. Claire went with him to Pierce Tower despite his protests, refusing to hide while he fought battles partially caused by her presence. The executive floor was all glass and steel, modern in the way that implied serious money and serious power. Victoria was waiting outside the conference room, her expression cold. Julian, I see you brought your guest. Claire is here as my personal invitee. She's not on the agenda. Everything's on the agenda when you've been MIA for days during a crucial acquisition negotiation. Victoria's gaze slid to Claire with unconcealed contempt. I hope whatever crisis she manufactured was worth potentially losing the Kellerman deal. Julian's voice went dangerously quiet. Be very careful what you say next. Or what? You'll suspend me the way the board's about to suspend you? Victoria smiled without warmth. They've already made their decision, Julian. James called the vote yesterday. You're officially on leave, effective immediately. I'm acting CEO until you demonstrate you can separate personal drama from company interests. Claire watched Julian absorb this, saw him calculating responses. Before he could speak, the conference room door opened and James Pierce emerged, older, silver-haired, wearing authority like a second skin. Son, Miss Morgan, he nodded curtly to each of them. This isn't personal. The board's concerned about your judgment lately. Taking time off to sort your household seems prudent. You're removing me based on Victoria's accusations and your own discomfort with my choices. I'm protecting the company you'll inherit someday from current instability. James glanced at Claire, dismissive. I'm sure Miss Morgan is lovely, but bringing her into your home without proper vetting, disappearing for days, ignoring board responsibilities, these aren't the actions of someone fit to run a $500 million enterprise. Julian stepped forward, positioning himself between his father and Claire in a gesture she recognized from the cabin, protective, deliberate. You're making a mistake. Victoria's been angling for this since Sarah died. You're just giving her ammunition. Then prove me wrong. Take 30 days, get your life sorted. Show us you can handle both personal and professional obligations. If you can't, maybe it's time to seriously consider whether CEO is the right role for you. The words landed like physical blows. Claire saw Julian absorb them, saw something harden in his expression that suggested he'd just made a decision his father wouldn't like. Fine, 30 days. But when I come back, we're having a conversation about board composition and who actually controls this company. Shareholders might be interested to know who pushed for this suspension. James's eyes narrowed. Careful, Julian. Threatening board members rarely ends well. It's not a threat, it's a promise. They left before anyone could respond. Julian moving with controlled fury through the elevator, the lobby, out to his car where he gripped the steering wheel hard enough to hurt. I'm sorry, Claire started. If I hadn't, don't. This isn't about you. It's about power and control, and my father thinking he still runs my life. Julian exhaled slowly, releasing tension. Actually, maybe it is about you, about me choosing someone that matters more than quarterly reports and board approval. And I don't regret it. Even though it cost you the company, it cost me 30 days. I'm still majority shareholder. Victoria can play CEO, but she can't make permanent changes without my vote. This is temporary theatrics, nothing more. But driving back to the penthouse, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that consequences were just beginning. Derek knew where she was. Julian's board thought he was unstable. Victoria had powers she'd use to maximum effect. And Claire was at the center of all of it, the catalyst for chaos she'd tried to avoid. Her first shift at Pittsburgh General that night should have been a relief. Familiar territory, skills she could trust, distance from the political warfare consuming Julian's professional life. But 2 hours into her shift, Patricia Hayes pulled her aside. Claire, you've got a visitor in the lobby. He says he's your husband, that there's been a family emergency. Ice flooded Claire's veins. What does he look like? Mid-30s, expensive suit, very polite, said his name is Derek Winters. The floor tilted. Claire grabbed the nurse's station counter for balance, mind racing. Derek was here, in her hospital, playing concerned spouse to get past security, knowing she'd have to face him or expose herself as the runaway wife she legally still was. Tell him I'll be down in 5 minutes, then call security and have them stand by and call this number. She scrawled Julian's cell on a notepad. Tell whoever answers that Derek Winters is at the hospital. Patricia's eyes widened with understanding. You want me to stall him? I want you to make sure there are witnesses when I talk to him. And cameras. This conversation needs to be documented. She changed out of scrubs into street clothes, buying time while her mind worked through approaches. Derek would be charming, would play the worried husband perfectly because that's what he did, perform for audiences while reserving violence for private moments. But Marcus's papers had been filed this morning. Derek knew Claire was divorcing him, had probably been served with documents detailing his abuse. This wasn't a man coming to reconcile. This was someone cornering prey. The lobby was bright and clinical, designed for transient traffic rather than confrontations. Derek sat in a plastic chair near the entrance, scrolling through his phone, picture of casual patients. He looked up when Claire approached, and his smile was the one she remembered from early in their marriage. Warm, genuine, completely false. Vanessa, thank God. I've been so worried. She stayed 10 feet away, keeping the security guard in her peripheral vision. Don't call me that. My name is Claire. That's what you're going by now? Claire Morgan, your mother's maiden name. Very creative. He stood slowly, hands visible, non-threatening. Can we talk somewhere private? No, anything you need to say, you can say here. Derek's smile tightened fractionally. Vanessa, Claire, I understand you're upset. I understand I made mistakes in our marriage. But running away, filing for divorce based on lies, living with another man, that's not the solution. Lies, you're calling 10 years of documented abuse lies. I'm calling them misunderstandings, times when my frustration got the better of me, when your behavior pushed me past limits, none of which justifies you stealing away in the middle of the night, making me think you were dead. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment Claire felt herself slipping back into old patterns, questioning her own memory, wondering if maybe she had exaggerated, if maybe Derek's version was closer to truth. Then she remembered waking up in a hospital bed, being told her baby was gone, and the clarity returned sharp as broken glass. I'm divorcing you. Stay away from me. Derek moved closer, still maintaining careful, non-threatening body language. You're my wife. You don't get to just decide we're done because you found some rich man willing to play hero. I love you, Vanessa. I want us to work this out. You killed our baby. The words came out flat, final. Derek's mask slipped for just a second, irritation flashing through before control reasserted. You lost a baby due to a tragic fall. I was devastated, if you remember correctly. And I remember you kicking me hard enough to cause internal bleeding. I remember you calling me a liar when I told you I was pregnant. I remember every second of what you did, and there's a doctor with 10 years of evidence to back me up. Evidence that can be explained. Accidents, clumsiness, your own instability. Dr. Moreno's going to testify to all your emotional problems, how you were always anxious and prone to injury. Is that a threat? Julian's voice cut through the lobby, sharp and controlled. He appeared from the corridor leading to the emergency department, still in the suit he'd worn to the board meeting, looking every inch the CEO despite being technically suspended. Behind him, Marcus Reed carried his ever-present briefcase. Derek's expression shifted, recalculating. Mr. Pierce, I've heard about you, the knight in shining armor rescuing my mentally unstable wife. Your ex-wife, as of this morning when papers were filed citing extreme cruelty and domestic violence. You've been served, Mr. Winters. This conversation is over. This conversation is between me and Vanessa. It's Claire, and no, it's not. You're trespassing in a hospital where she works, harassing her despite knowing she's seeking legal separation. Security's been called, and every word you've said has been recorded on hospital cameras. Derek looked at the cameras mounted in corners, at the security guard now joined by a second one, at Marcus pulling out his phone to make the recording even more explicit. His face went hard, the mask finally dropping completely. You think you can keep her? The question was directed at Julian, all pretense of civility gone. You think I'm going to let some CEO with a savior complex steal my wife just because he has money and connections? Vanessa belongs to me. I built her from nothing. I supported her for 10 years, and I'm not letting her go because she had some temporary crisis of conscience. Last chance to leave voluntarily. Julian's voice had gone arctic. Or security removes you and I file harassment charges to add to the divorce proceedings. Your choice. Derek looked at Claire, and in his eyes she saw rage barely contained, the promise of consequences whenever he could catch her without witnesses. Then he straightened his tie, smoothed his expression back to civilized, and walked toward the exit. He paused at the door, looked back. This isn't over, Vanessa. You made vows. I intend to hold you to them. After he left, Claire realized she was shaking so hard, her teeth chattered. Julian moved to her side immediately, not touching, but present, grounding. You okay? He's going to keep coming. Legal papers won't stop him, threats won't stop him. He sees this as a challenge to his ownership. And then we make it clear that challenging me is a mistake. Julian looked at Marcus. File the restraining order tonight. Expedite it. I want Derek Winters legally prohibited from coming within 500 feet of Claire by tomorrow morning. Already drafted, just needed tonight's incident for evidence. Hospital cameras caught everything, and I've got statements from security. A judge will sign this within hours. Claire wanted to believe it would be enough, wanted to think legal barriers and Julian's resources could actually keep her safe. But she'd lived with Derek for 10 years, had learned exactly how far he'd go to maintain control. He'll wait, find the moment when I'm alone, when there are no cameras or witnesses. That's what he does, waits for opportunity. Julian turned to face her fully. Then you're not alone. Not until this is resolved. You go to work, I drive you. You have days off, someone's with you. He wants to get to you? He'll have to go through me first. You can't arrange your entire life around protecting me. Watch me, I'm already suspended from the company. 30 days to sort my personal life. Consider this sorting it. They stood in the hospital lobby, fluorescent lights harsh overhead, and Claire felt the weight of choices crystallizing. She could run again, disappear into another city with another name, spend her life looking over her shoulder. Or she could stay and fight beside this man who'd proven himself willing to sacrifice professional standing and personal safety for her. Okay, she heard herself say. We fight. Marcus nodded approval. Good. Fighting means we control the narrative instead of reacting to Derek's moves. Speaking of which, there's something else you should know. He pulled documents from his briefcase. I did deeper digging into Winters' logistics. Derek's business is leveraged to the hilt. Bank loans, investor capital, all dependent on maintaining government contracts. Those contracts require clean records. No legal liabilities. You're saying if he gets charged with domestic violence, he loses everything. I'm saying if domestic violence allegations become public and credible, he loses access to capital, his investors get nervous, and his company collapses. Derek's not just fighting for control over you, Claire. He's fighting for his livelihood, which makes him more dangerous but also more predictable. Julian's expression went calculating. So we make it public? Press conference, Claire's testimony, medical evidence. Put Derek in a position where coming after her means destroying himself. Exactly, it's high risk, exposes Claire to scrutiny and judgment, but it removes Derek's power to operate in shadows. Claire thought about standing in front of cameras, admitting to the world what she'd hidden for a decade. Thought about Derek's family and friends and business partners, all learning what kind of man he really was. It felt like stripping naked in public, exposing every vulnerable place. But it also felt like the only way to stop running. When? 2 days. I'll arrange everything. Venue, media contacts, protective measures. You'll read a prepared statement. Marcus will field legal questions. Julian can be there for support if you want. I want, Claire said quietly, looking at Julian. I'm going to need all the support I can get. They left the hospital together, Julian's hand at the small of her back, protective without being possessive. The drive home was silent, both of them processing what came next. When they reached the penthouse, 5 children ambushed them with questions about where they'd been, whether Miss Claire was staying for dinner, could they watch a movie together. Normal domestic chaos. Claire sank into it gratefully, helping Sophie with homework, while Lucas showed her his latest art project, and Emma complained about math with less hostility than usual. Even Asher settled nearby, working on his own assignments but close enough to be included in the general noise. Julian watched from the kitchen doorway, something soft in his expression that made Claire's chest tighten. She caught his eye across the room and mouthed, "Thank you." Later, after bedtime routines and goodnight hugs, they found themselves on the penthouse balcony under December stars. The city spread below them, alive with lights and movement, while they stood 30 stories above it all. "In 2 days, I'm going to tell the world what Derek did to me," Claire said quietly. "Everyone's going to know I was weak, that I stayed, that I couldn't protect even my own child. You weren't weak. Survival takes more strength than most people ever need. People won't see it that way. They'll ask why I didn't leave sooner, why I married him in the first place, why I didn't fight back. And I won't have good answers." Julian moved closer until they were shoulder to shoulder at the railing. "Then we tell them the truth, that you did leave, that you rebuilt your life from nothing, that you're standing here now willing to face the man who tried to destroy you. That's not weakness, Claire. That's courage." She wanted to believe him, wanted to see herself through his eyes instead of Derek's or society's or the critical voice in her own head that still sometimes sounded like her ex-husband. What if we do all this and it doesn't work? What if Derek still finds a way to hurt me? Then we deal with it. But Claire, I promise you, he's not taking you back. Not while I'm alive to prevent it. The words landed with the weight of vows, promises that transcended temporary arrangements or mutual convenience. Claire turned to face him, searching his expression for doubt or obligation, finding neither. "Why does this matter so much to you? I'm not Sarah. I can't replace what you lost." "I don't want you to replace her." Julian's voice was rough, honest. "Sarah was my first love, my children's mother, and I'll always carry her with me. But you're not her, and that's the point. You're Claire, strong and brave and willing to love my damaged kids despite having every reason not to trust anyone. You're the woman I can't stop thinking about, can't stop wanting to protect, can't imagine not having in my life." The admission hung in the cold night air, vulnerable and definitive. Claire's heart hammered against her ribs, every instinct screaming that wanting things meant giving people power to hurt her. But standing here with Julian, with his honesty laid bare and his future tangled impossibly with hers, she couldn't make herself step back. "I'm terrified of this," she whispered. "Of you. Of feeling things I haven't let myself feel in years." "So am I. Terrified of failing you, of not being enough, of loving someone again and losing them." He moved closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "But I'm more terrified of not trying, of letting fear win when I finally found someone worth fighting for." Claire closed the remaining distance between them, rose on her toes, and kissed him before courage could abandon her. Julian froze for one suspended heartbeat before his arms came around her, pulling her close with a care that suggested he understood exactly how fragile trust could be. The kiss was gentle, tentative, nothing like Derek's demands or violations. It was asking instead of taking, offering instead of claiming. When they finally broke apart, Claire pressed her forehead to Julian's chest, listening to his racing heartbeat. "I don't know how to do this, how to be with someone without waiting for the moment they turn cruel. Then we learned together, no expectations, no pressure, just seeing what this could be when neither of us is running from ghosts." They stood on the balcony until cold drove them inside, until proximity to bedrooms made the situation complicated enough that Julian retreated to his room with a lingering look that promised conversations not yet finished. Claire lay in her bed, their guest room that had somehow become her sanctuary, and tried to process how radically life had shifted in 3 weeks. She'd gone from homeless to housed, from terrified to defended, from existing to actually living. And somewhere in that transformation, she'd fallen for a man who looked at her like she mattered, who chose her over corporate approval, who kissed her like she was something precious instead of something owned. 2 days later, Claire stood at a podium in Marcus Reed's conference room, facing cameras and journalists while Julian sat in the front row radiating support. Her hands shook holding the prepared statement, words Marcus had written and she'd edited until they captured truth without drowning in trauma. My name is Claire Morgan. For 10 years, I was known as Vanessa Winters, wife of Derek Winters. Today, I'm here to tell you why I left that identity behind. She read through her statement, clinical details of abuse, medical evidence, the pregnancy she'd lost to violence, her escape with Dr. Grace's help. Journalists scribbled notes, cameras recorded every word, and Claire felt herself becoming public record instead of private shame. I'm speaking out today because Derek Winters found me and threatened to force me back into a marriage I legally and morally left. I'm speaking out because domestic violence thrives in silence, and I'm done being silent. I'm speaking out because no one owns me, not my ex-husband, not fear, not the shame I carried for too long. She looked directly at the camera. If you're living what I lived, know that leaving is possible, that you're not alone, that there are people willing to help if you can find the courage to ask. And if you're Derek Winters watching this, stay away from me. I'm done being afraid of you. Questions came rapid fire after that. Marcus fielded most of them, but Claire answered when asked directly. Yes, she had police reports and medical evidence. No, she hadn't reported Derek because she'd been conditioned to believe it was futile. Yes, she was seeking divorce on grounds of extreme cruelty. One journalist asked the question Claire had been dreading. Ms. Morgan, you're currently living with Julian Pierce, recently suspended CEO of Pierce Holdings. Are you in a relationship with him? Did that relationship begin while you were still married? Claire met Julian's eyes across the room before answering. I met Mr. Pierce after I left my husband. He offered me employment and housing when I had neither. Any relationship beyond that is personal and no one's business but ours. The press conference ended 45 minutes later. Claire stepped away from the podium, feeling scraped raw, exposed in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. But when Julian approached and took her hand in full view of remaining journalists, she let him. You did great, he said quietly. I'm proud of you. It doesn't feel great. It feels like I just invited the whole world to judge me. They can judge all they want. You survived. That's all that matters. Marcus appeared with his phone. Derek's attorney just called, wants to discuss settlement terms. He's willing to fast-track the divorce, waive all claims to assets, in exchange for Claire retracting the abuse allegations. Absolutely not, both Claire and Julian said simultaneously. I figured, but it shows the press conference worked. Derek's scared enough to negotiate. His business partners are already distancing themselves according to my contacts. 3 days later, Derek Winters was arrested on domestic violence charges. Pennsylvania had decided 10 years of documented abuse constituted grounds for criminal prosecution, despite the time lag. He posted bail within hours, but the damage was done. His business partnerships dissolved, government contracts suspended pending investigation, investors pulling funding faster than he could replace it. Claire watched the news coverage with Julian beside her. 5 kids sprawled across the living room floor, pretending not to listen while actually absorbing every word. He's going to be angrier now, she said quietly, more dangerous. He's also being watched. Violating a restraining order while facing criminal charges would be catastrophic for him. Derek's calculating, not suicidal. You don't know him like I do. He doesn't calculate when he's cornered. He lashes out. Julian pulled her closer. Then we stay alert. But Claire, you did it. You fought back, and you won. Derek Winters' life is imploding, while yours is just beginning. That has to count for something. It did. It counted for everything. Claire let herself lean into Julian's warmth, let herself believe that maybe, finally, she was actually safe. The weeks that followed were strange, hyper-vigilant, waiting for Derek to retaliate, gradually realizing he wouldn't because he couldn't afford to. His attorney filed the divorce papers with remarkable speed, and 3 months after Claire had stood on that press conference podium, the marriage was legally dissolved. She was free. Actually, completely legally free. Julian's 30-day suspension ended with the board reluctantly reinstating him after he made it clear he'd force a shareholder vote on their positions otherwise. Victoria remained COO, but with significantly diminished influence after Julian restructured reporting lines. His father maintained awkward distance, unwilling to acknowledge he'd been wrong, but also unwilling to push the conflict further. 5 months after Christmas Eve, Julian found Claire in the kitchen making dinner while the kids did homework. He came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist in a gesture that had become familiar. Welcome. I have something to ask you. Okay. The guest room. I was thinking maybe you don't need it anymore. Maybe you'd want to move into a different room. With me. Permanently. Claire turned in his arms, studied his face. Are you asking me to move in with you? We already live together. I'm asking you to be with me, officially, not as someone staying temporarily, but as someone who belongs here. She thought about the months since she'd met this man, how he'd taken her from a frozen bench to a life she couldn't have imagined, how his children called her by name without prompting, how Lucas still brought her pictures to approve, how even Asher had started seeking her opinion on homework. I want that, she said simply. I want to belong here. Julian kissed her there in the kitchen with burned dinner on the stove and children pretending not to watch from the dining table. When they broke apart, Emma called out, "Finally! We've been waiting forever for you two to figure it out." You have not, Julian protested. Dad, we literally had a betting pool. Noah thought it would take another month. 5 children dissolved into laughter while Claire and Julian stood in their kitchen, not his anymore but theirs, and marveled at how life could change in the span of a single season. 6 months later, they married in a small ceremony on the penthouse balcony where they'd first admitted feelings too large to contain. Dr. Grace flew in to attend, cried through the entire event. Marcus served as Julian's best man, and 5 8-year-olds acted as collective wedding party, their joy at officially becoming a family impossible to miss. When the officiant pronounced them married, Lucas shouted that he'd called it from the beginning, that he'd known Miss Claire would stay. Emma rolled her eyes but hugged Claire fiercely afterward. Asher simply said, "Welcome to the family," with a gravity that suggested he'd already considered her part of it for months. And Claire, standing on a balcony 30 stories above Pittsburgh, with a man who'd proven love didn't have to hurt, with children who'd chosen to trust her, with a future that belonged entirely to her, finally understood what Dr. Grace had meant months ago. She'd already survived the worst part. Everything else was just learning to live again. 3 years later, Claire Pierce worked full-time at Pittsburgh General as the new director of emergency services. Julian ran Pierce Holdings with renewed focus, having finally found balance between professional ambition and personal priorities. 5 children, no longer quintuplets in their own eyes, but individuals named Asher, Emma, Noah, Lucas, and Sophie, navigated middle school with varying degrees of calm and success. On the anniversary of the night Julian had stopped his car for a stranger, Claire stood at the same window where she'd first watched snowfall on this city. Julian joined her, sliding an arm around her waist. "What are you thinking about?" "How much can change in 3 years, how I almost didn't get in your car that night." "I'm glad you did." "Me too." She leaned into him. "Though I maintain you were reckless, picking up homeless people on Christmas Eve." "Best reckless decision I ever made." Behind them, 5 children argued about movie choices, negotiated snack distributions, filled their home with noise that had once felt overwhelming but now felt essential. Claire thought about the woman she'd been, Vanessa Winters, broken and terrified, believing she deserved nothing better than violence dressed as love. She thought about becoming Claire Morgan, then Claire Pierce, about learning that strong arms could hold without crushing, that love could be given freely instead of purchased with compliance, that family could be built from choice rather than obligation. "Do you ever regret it?" Julian asked quietly, "taking the risk of trusting me?" Claire turned to face him fully, framed his face with her hands. "Not for a single second. You gave me back my life, Julian. Everything else is just details." They kissed there in the window while snow began to fall again. Circular. Perfect. The universe offering proof that endings could also be beginnings. That salvation could arrive in unexpected forms. That love, real love, was worth every risk required to claim it. And in the living room, 5 children watched their parents with satisfaction, already planning how to tell this story when they were older, the night their dad stopped for someone who needed help, and how that single choice had built a family from pieces nobody else wanted.